Good indeterminate time of day, scumbags. My name is Andrew Fantasia. Welcome to the show. I have to apologize for how atrocious my hair looks, but you know what? That's okay. We are not in a position where we can cut our hair. In fact, I'm going to go right ahead and say it. I don't trust anybody who has nice looking hair during a quarantine where no barbers are open. Something ain't right about that. No. That's what we in the industry like to call suspicious. Anyways, all kidding aside, welcome to High Ground, and I have a very special High Ground planned for all of you. It's July, it's the summertime, baby. It's hot fun in the summertime, but we don't know what kind of summer this is going to be, do we? We don't know if we're going to be able to go outside and do stuff. We don't know if we're going to be able to travel. We don't know if we're going to be able to, visit a place of entertainment and be entertained. We have no idea what the summer of 2020 is going to look like out there. In here, it's a whole other ballgame. High Ground is the place where you come and listen to myself or James or Brock or Aaron or Rob talk about a book or something else related to Star Wars that has come out that we want to discuss. And considering how much we all love Star Wars, it's usually just a bunch of videos of us going, wow, this is so cool. But this summer, things are going to be a little bit different. I am going to take you guys on a journey through the earliest stages of my Star Wars fandom in literature. And when I say early, I mean pre-Disney, baby. That's right. So take off those Mickey Mouse ears, get rid of that Finn Poe jacket, and get ready to strap on a red Mara Jade wig, grab your purple Kip Duran lightsaber. Welcome to the summer of legends. Now, I've talked about Legends books on High Ground before. I just recently did a video on Ryder Wyndham's Ultimate Visual Guide, and I've talked ad nauseum about the Scholastic Star Wars Missions pen and paper game. And if you haven't seen those videos, we'll put a description below and you can see those videos and see just how much danged fun I had talking about things that no longer matter in the grand scheme of things. But no, the Summer of Legends is going to encompass even more than that. I have dug out every single Legends book that I own, and I'm going to show you everything I've got and talk about everything I've got and go over the memories of Star Wars based on what I'm showing you. And today, to kick things off, I'm starting with the smallest batch of Legends books I own, the fiction paperbacks. It's plain and simple. I was always a reference book guy growing up with Star Wars. I liked reading about the lore, about the ships, about the characters, all that stuff. I never really dived into the novels as much, but when I did, I dived into everything we're going to be talking about today. Why waste any more time? Let's get started. So I figured I would start with these ones because they're actually the newest ones. As you can see, they all have the Legends banner along the top, which means they were published after 2012. And what I've got here, what I'm holding in my hand, let's start with the obvious one that everybody would probably expect, is the Thrawn trilogy, the Timothy Zahn trilogy. We got Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command, which is kind of like the First Order, but just said differently. And it's like a synonym and an antonym. That's weird. I don't know how that happened. This is a big deal because this is what started Star Wars paperback fiction. This is what kickstarted it in 1991, I believe. Let's see if I'm right. Here's the first one. Let me see the original publishing date and see if I got the date right or if I was a dummy. No, I was right. It's 1991. All right. Okay. I don't have to cash in my dummy card just yet. Yes, between around 1985 and 1991, there was no Star Wars content. They weren't making the Ewoks and Droids cartoons anymore. They weren't making books. All they were doing was the West End Games role-playing game that, frankly, had all the info you wanted for Star Wars. And I don't have any West End Game stuff, which I'm kind of bummed about because that's where all the goodness lies. That's the juice. All the juice is there. But eventually, Timothy Zahn was like, I'm going to start a expanded universe of Star Wars, and I'm going to start with this story and we're going to branch out from there. It's going to take place after Return of the Jedi, so we just continue the story of Luke, Han, Leia, Chewbacca, C-3PO, and R2-D2, and probably Wedge. And that's exactly what happened. And we ended up with this trilogy that took the world by storm, and Star Wars fans were like, yes, thank you, more please. and we ended up with the expanded universe, which was a cluster. Anyway, so I read these in maybe like 2016 or something when I picked them up. They're okay. They are okay. I like that they actually do have Luke, Han, and Leia as the main heroes, which is very rare in Star Wars books, both canon and Legends. That just doesn't happen. You know, they introduce new characters and then all of a sudden it's like, well, now this book's going to be about Jerko McFane and this one's about Skelly. No, they actually have Luke, Han, and Leia as the main heroes. It really feels like what an episode 7 would have been like if they had just kept going after Return of the Jedi. So that's kind of neat. That's what I do like about these. And this is the best that Timothy Zahn's Thrawn has ever been. I have to state that. I think Thrawn is at his best when he's in Rebels, because in Rebels he is not a perfect, infallible, insufferable jerk. In all of Thrawn's books, he is. He is an unlikable douche who's just always like, I'm right all the time. Yay. But in these ones, it was a bit more subtle. So I think this is the best that Thrawn has ever been written by his creator. Besides being the first appearance of Thrawn, it's also the first appearance of other mainstays in the Star Wars expanding universe, like Captain Gilad Pellaeon and Mara Jade, who eventually ends up marrying Luke. And she's also really cool, and she works for the Emperor and stuff. It's just all awesome lore that never ended up coming to pass. I don't know if we'll ever see Mara Jade, but I hope so, because damn was she ever a cool character, and I think she fits in well with new canon. So that's the Thrawn trilogy. Next up, another one everybody knows, Shadows of the Empire, baby. Look at that Drew Struzan cover. That's why you get Drew Struzan to do things for you. Look how beautiful that is. I didn't read this book. All I had, Shadows of the Empire wise in my life was that N64 game that my cousins and I played a bunch. Then I was like, well, maybe I should check this out because I'm part of a Star Wars podcast and it's like 2016 now, so I should kind of do my homework. So I did my homework. This is a good book. This is a very good book. It was written by Steve Perry, not the Steve Perry of Journey. Damn it. Damn it. But still, a pretty cool Steve Perry regardless, and he wrote a hell of a good book. This is excellent, and it really does have that Star Wars feel. A lot of books with the Star Wars name on the front, whether they're good or bad, don't feel like Star Wars. This feels like Star Wars. Shadows of the Empire, baby. This is a gem. And the last thing I have with the Legends banner here is the Darth Plagueis novel by James Luceno. This was a relatively late addition to the game here. I think this was published in 2011, I'm going to say. 2012. I was wrong. You might as well just stop listening to me now. I'm clearly misinformed. Yeah, 2012, so it's one of the last published books before Disney took over. And it tells the backstory of Darth Plagueis and Sheev Palpatine and how they sort of met and became master and apprentice, and the story of how Palpatine ended up killing Plagueis and moving on to become the Sith Lord. Again, not a bad book, but does not feel like Star Wars. James Luceno's books are very wordy. They're very cold and political. There's no heart in his books. They're very cold and dark. I'm not bashing it. I'm not saying that makes it bad. I'm just saying if you like the heart and warmth that you usually get from Star Wars films, that's not in James Luceno's books. Any of the ones I have read anyway. And this is no exception. I mean, you can tell by the cover. This is not going to be a sunshine and rainbows kind of thing. This is Darth Plagueis. Those two words sound like evil things. It is definitely an interesting story, and I liked it more than I liked the Timothy Zahn Thrawn trilogy. Am I biased because my favorite character, Palpatine, is one of the main persons in it? People? Maybe. But it didn't really grip me and make me think like, ooh, this is amazing. I know there are some people out there, like Christian Harloff swears by this book and wants it to be canon. I don't know if it ever will be. I don't know if we'll ever have canon Darth Plagueis. I'm sure eventually something will happen. But for now, I think it's decent. And I think that it tells the story it needs to tell well enough. For Legends, it was probably an exceptional book. For Legends, it was probably one of the best Legends books there ever was. And I get that. But considering the more streamlined, focused stories we've gotten in canon now, it sort of gets lost in the shuffle. I think that's the best way to describe Darth Plagueis. But now those all have the Legends banner, which means I purchased them recently. What about the ones that I purchased back in the day? What about the ones that informed my childhood reading Star Wars books? Good question. Let's rewind the clock a bit, and I'll take you further back in time to what I was reading before the House of Mouse became the House of the Force. All right, first of all, I've got a pair of Timothy Zahn novels here. Again, Timothy, he's one of the most prolific Star Wars writers. He did a bunch of stuff. And I got here Allegiance and Outbound Flight, 2007, 2006. We have rewound the clock about 6 years from the last books I've shown you. I remember buying these both at once, so I would have bought them in 2007-ish. And I picked them both up because I was like, these look like cool Star Wars books. I haven't read a good Star Wars book in a while. Let's see what these are all about. Didn't love them. I know it sounds like this video is just a big bashing of Timothy Zahn, but I didn't love these. Allegiance was just, it gave you what the cover promised. It was a bunch of stormtroopers who kind of turned against their commanding officer and went rogue, but they didn't, turn to the good side necessarily. They just kind of disobeyed their orders to do something else. And then Mara Jade had to kind of come in and confront them and see that they were not disloyal to the Empire. And at the end of the book, Darth Vader shows up and he's like, I heard you guys were doing some bad things. I'm going to force choke you. And Mara Jade was like, nah, they're cool. They're cool. I don't remember much about it. And it's, there's a character named Brock in the book. That's something. Brock, you should read this. Are you watching? You're watching. You should read this. So you get Mara Jade and you get Brock, but other than that, the book is just about these stormtroopers. I don't know. As a younger guy, I had trouble reading a book that said Star Wars if it didn't star at least one character I was familiar with. And this book just stars these 4 troopers. I think there's 4 of them. And I just didn't care. Like, I don't care about Macross and Pertona or whatever their names are, Larone. Like, I don't care about these stormtroopers and whatever their whole mission was, and it clearly didn't matter in the grand scheme of things because I don't think these guys ever appeared anywhere in canon again. Maybe one day I'll read this again and try to get through it with a more open mind, but it left 0 impression on me. Then here we have Star Wars Outbound Flight, also by Timothy Zahn, published a year earlier. Outbound Flight was a cooler concept. Definitely a cooler concept than Allegiance. It involved this ship, Outbound Flight, which was supposed to go off and explore the unknown regions or whatever. It was sort of like a probe sent to go out and map stuff. The whole Outbound Flight and everything that it does is very, very reminiscent of what we got later on in canon with all the stuff Palpatine was doing, sending, probes out to the far reaches of space to try to figure out what's going on out beyond the edges of the map. Outbound Flight was kind of the precursor to that. Again, Timothy Zahn. So in this book, you get Thrawn. Whoop, there he is. Thrawn's back. You also get Joruus C'baoth, the mad old Jedi who we meet in the original Thrawn trilogy from 1991. This is before he went mad. Sidious, because this takes place during the Clone Wars. You get a little bit of Anakin. I think you get a little bit of Luke. I could be wrong. And you also get like Booster Tarek. So there's a lot of just EU characters that are grabbed and bunched together in this. So that makes it a much more interesting read. However, I don't know, maybe I just read it really fast when I bought it, but I couldn't tell you a single thing about the plot other than what Outbound Flight is. That's it. That is literally it. Something about the way Timothy Zahn writes books, they just bore the hell out of me. I don't know what it is. He is very technical, so maybe it's just too military for me. Too much war, not enough lore. That might be it. But if you like the idea of crossovers within the Star Wars universe, the Star Wars Legends universe, Outbound Flight might be the perfect book for you because it really does feel like an Avengers level crossover. Then earlier that same year, I picked up this. This is the first book in the Darth Bane trilogy, Path of Destruction by Drew Karpyshyn. I picked this up because it was Old Republic related, and I loved the Old Republic, that's the Old Republic video game. And Drew Karpyshyn was a writer for that, so I was like, score! Everything's great. I definitely remember more about reading this. I remember this was right after college. I just finished graduating college. I picked this up. I saw that there was a Darth Bane trilogy, so I picked up book 1. I'm like, all right, let's see what this is like. And I didn't like it. It was lame. I really just couldn't get excited about anything that happened. I found that Darth Bane took a backseat to other characters who were way less interesting and had way less to offer the grand scheme of things. And even I don't think that that's a fair judgment because I only read book 1. This is a trilogy. I don't know what happens in books 2 and 3, but I clearly didn't care enough to continue because I never bought books 2 and 3. I stopped after book 1. I think what happened was just I had heard so much about Darth Bane and how cool he was and how he just, he started the rule of 2. That was his idea. He's like the Abraham Lincoln of Sith, man. He's a legend. And then I read his book and I was like, that was a boring ass legend. No thanks. I don't remember a single thing Darth Bane himself does in this book. I remember the other characters. And that's not because the other characters were memorable. It's because the other characters did more in the story. There was a Jedi and he had a Padawan and she was like, oh, I want to go get the Sith. And he was like, I don't know. He was wary about it. And they went off and they met this like group of smugglers and stuff. And they went on their ship and they're flying around. And Darth Bane, I couldn't tell you a single thing that he does because it was completely not absorbed by my little post-college brain. I'm sorry, but Darth Bane was Darth Lame. I don't know. Again, maybe I'll give this another chance, look at it with a fresher, more mature perspective. Maybe I'll end up loving it, and I'll have to go pick up the other 2 books because I'll be hungry for what comes next, even if it's Legends. I hope so. I hope that's the case. But then again, I hope not, because then that means I would be spending money, and I don't have money. So, I don't know. Either way, I win. Either I don't have to spend money, or I spend money, but I get 2 other great books out of it. Win-win. All right, so that was 2007, 2006. But now it's time to rewind the clock a little bit more. I'm going to take you all the way back to 2005 when Star Wars was, for lack of a better word, finished. During this time, James Luceno was a busy man because he was preoccupied writing these bookends. This is Labyrinth of Evil, the only hardcover of Legends that I own, and Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader. Yes, 2005 Star Wars, it was all about the fiery reds and oranges because Revenge of the Sith had just come out, and that was the color palette for that movie, baby. Lava everywhere. These were bookends because this came before Revenge, this came right after Revenge. They were meant to sort of bookend it just like that. So you could read this, watch the movie, and then read this. I was very excited for this book because my excitement for the movie Revenge of the Sith itself had reached a fever pitch. I was living with my cousin who was another big Star Wars fan. The 2 of us were just salivating. We were eating up every bit of news we could that the movie was slowly but surely on its way out. And then Labyrinth of Evil comes out as a prequel. Now, every one of the prequel movies had a book like this, a prequel book that you were meant to read right before the movie came out. Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones had them as well. I can't remember their names offhand, but this was the one that just had the most marketing power behind it. Everybody was like, dude, Labyrinth of Evil, this is almost like required reading before you see the movie. Now, I read this a year before I read those last 3 books I showed you. And I remember this more than I remember anything that happens in those last 3 books. Goes to show some writers are just more memorable. But again, this is James Luceno, who, as I said earlier, has a very cold, wordy, not a lot of heart to his stories. But that's okay because it kind of fits with this. It's called Labyrinth of Evil. This is not called Straightforward Path of Friendship. This book also had more of my favorite prequel villain, General Grievous, so I was ready to scoop this up. And it was decent. It was a decent story. It talked about how General Grievous sort of came to be in the employ of the Separatists. There is a great scene that I always remember from this book where Count Dooku is training Grievous in lightsaber combat, and they have like a sparring match, and Grievous is good, but he's not great, and Dooku's like, okay, you lost to me. What do you think is going to happen when you fight somebody like Obi-Wan or Yoda? Like, they are going to rip you apart. You need to be a better duelist. And Grievous is like, then teach me to be better. My Grievous is usually better than that. I'm sorry. That sounded more like Watto. There's also a great scene in here that I remember. If you recall in Revenge of the Sith, there's a line where Anakin is talking to Obi-Wan, and Anakin says, I've saved your life, I think like 10 times now or something. And Obi-Wan replies, 9 times. That business on Cato Nemoidia doesn't count. The business on Cato Nemoidia is in this book, and it's really funny. There's these like spores or something. They're in this cave, and whatever is in the air, Obi-Wan breathes it in, and it kind of makes him drunk. He's got this big grin on his face, and he's like, "Ooh, Anakin, what's going on? I don't know." He basically turns into Jack Sparrow, and Anakin's running around trying to save him and fight off these enemies and droids that are coming at them. And Obi-Wan's just useless. He's just kind of hanging around like, "Anakin, your lightsaber is so pretty. Why is it blue? Why is the sky blue? It was hilarious. It was one of the funniest moments in Star Wars Legends. And it's a nice little nod to the movie because you get backstory for that line of dialogue, which is what Star Wars books are all about at the end of the day. Now, on this side of the coin, we have Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader. And boy, I have a funny bit of information to tell you about this. First of all, this was meant to take place immediately following Revenge of the Sith. Kind of like how now we have the Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith comic that does that. This was sort of the precursor to that. Now, funny story. A few minutes ago when I was talking about this, I mentioned how I remember a Jedi and his Padawan teaming up with a crew of smugglers and stuff more than I remember Darth Bane himself. That's how unmemorable this book was. Well, guess what? That storyline that I remember with the Jedi and his teenage Padawan meeting up with smugglers, that's from this book. That is how completely forgettable Darth Bane was for me. Yikes. Yes, this book has a couple of Jedi named Roan Shrine and Bol Chatak and the Padawan Oli Starstone. She's the girl that I remembered. And they all are running from Vader and the Empire and all that. And that is what made Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader fall short for me because it's called Dark Lord. It's sub-called The Rise of Darth Vader. It's got Darth Vader on the cover. And Darth Vader was half of the story, and the other half was these three Jedi who I didn't care about. Again, I remember their stuff more than I remember what Vader was doing in the book. That is not acceptable. I don't know why, but that's all that stuck out for me. So whatever Vader himself did clearly wasn't very memorable. The only part of this book that I remember really loving, and I couldn't find it in the thing as I was flipping through it, but there's basically a part of the book where you're inside Vader's mind and he's describing how his body feels now that he is no longer Anakin, but Vader. And if I recall right, it kind of had this sort of poetic rhythm to it where it was like, he didn't see anymore, the helmet saw for him. He didn't breathe anymore, the helmet breathed for him. It described what it felt like to breathe through that oxygen thing. It described what it looked like to see through those two lenses. It was very up close and personal with what it's like to wear the armor of Vader. That part stuck with me. I really liked that. Everything else with Vader in it clearly did not sit well in here, and instead all I retained was Oli Starstone and her Jedi Masters hanging around in a ship with some folks. That was it. But again, maybe it'll benefit from a second read now that I've matured like a fine wine. So that was 2005. Let me rewind the clock a bit more and take you to 2003/2004. Attack of the Clones had taken the world by storm, and now we were right smack dab in the middle of the Clone Wars. Clone Wars was everywhere, and Del Rey made sure they banked on it with a series of Clone Wars novels. As you can see here, a Clone Wars novel. There was a few of these, and I own 3 of them. This was the Mace Windu novel, Shatterpoint. There was also an Anakin one, an Obi-Wan one, a Yoda one, and then 2 others. This whole book was essentially a Star Wars meets Heart of Darkness kind of thing. Mace Windu is looking for Depa Billaba, who we now know in canon as the Jedi Master of Kanan Jarrus. Depa Billaba went to Mace Windu's homeworld, which is all jungle, and she disappeared, and nobody knows what happened to her. So Mace goes, because he knows the planet and he's friends with Depa, he goes to the planet to try to find her. And it's all, like I said, it's all very Heart of Darkness. Colonel Kurtz, she's in the jungle. She's gone crazy because the jungle's full of mercenaries and stuff, and it's just messed with her head. And he has to go get her out and extract her, but there's bad people in the jungle. There's a guy named Car Vaster, who is a bad dude. There's another guy named Nick something. I can't remember his last name, but I know his name was Nick. And he helps Mace out. He becomes his ally. I remember this book much more than I remember those other ones I talked about. There is definitely more memorable, but it was, again, dark and dreary and not Star Wars-y enough. It was very disturbing. This one was written by Matthew Stover, who I don't think I've read any of his other books, so it's hard to gauge what his writing is usually like. But the cover's beautiful. I think this is nice. And what's cool about it, I didn't know this at the time, but lately I've been researching, and those 2 characters I mentioned, Car Vaster, the villain of the book, and the other guy, Nick, they both survive this book, and they end up in a bunch of other Star Wars Legends books. Nick survives to, like, the Yuzon Vong War. Remember that? Like, he's around for those books, which is crazy. And Car Vaster eventually becomes a good guy, and I think he helps the New Republic out with something else, but talk about great, holding on to characters and stretching them out over time. the EU was doing more of that than I initially thought, and I have more respect for EU Legends now than I ever did. But Shatterpoint, not my favorite. I picked it up because it was part of this series of the Clone Wars novel, and I thought, that's cool, I want to get all these Clone Wars novels. I only ended up getting a few, and this was my least favorite of the ones that I own. Like I said, there's an Anakin one called Jedi Trial. There's an Obi-Wan one called The Cestus Deception, which I read, cannot remember, but do not own. Then there's a Yoda one whose name I don't remember at all. Then there are two others. And those two others are known as the MedStar duology, and I own those right here. We got Battle Surgeons and Jedi Healer. And as you can see, that is Barriss Offee, Luminara Unduli's Padawan, who, as we now know in Clone Wars, was a traitor. But that's okay, we won't hold it against her. This is Legends, and in Legends, she's a nice lady. If Shatterpoint was Star Wars meets Heart of Darkness / Apocalypse Now, then the MedStar duology is Star Wars meets MASH. And that's exactly what it is. We're on this planet where you have a medical camp set up for soldiers, for clone troopers, for Jedi, mostly clone troopers, but it's a Republic medical camp where clone troopers who are injured come and get healed. And it's on this specific planet called Drongar because Drongar has a specific type of plant that is excellent for healing purposes. It's very valuable, and the Separatists want this plant. So the planet's always kind of in danger, even though it's a place where you go to get healed. And these are relatively thin books. They're thinner than most of the other ones I've shown you, so they're quick reads. But what the MedStar duology does is it does something magnificent that I never thought I would enjoy in Star Wars, where there's no main characters who you know. Everybody who's a main character is a brand new character, mostly confined to these two books, though some of them do move on. And it's just this group of characters who work in this medical camp. There's doctors, nurses, there's a psychologist, and one of them is a spy. There's a traitor in their midst, and you have to figure out who it is. It's a whodunit. MASH meets Star Wars whodunit. Take my money. Of course, you don't find out who done it till the end of book 2, and I almost guessed it, but I was wrong. I still remember reading it and thinking it's this person, and I got right to the end, and that person was like the only other suspect left besides the guilty party, and then it ended up not being them, it ended up being the guilty party. This was so memorable, and all the characters were so human and real, and the whole story really gripped me emotionally. I loved these two books. I really, really did. I only read them that one time, but I remember all of this about them. I remember the conversations these characters had. I remember this first book where the main character sees the girl whose name was Tolk Letren. I remember her name. He sees Tolk Letren and he's like, I've been working with her all these months and I never realized she's beautiful. I like this girl. I want to go after her. But he never really gets around to having the romance he wants to, and then all the spy intrigue gets in the way. And at the end of the first book, Barriss Offee is in trouble and she's unconscious, and without the Jedi's help, they have to kind of figure out who the spy is on their own. This is goodness. This is the Clone Wars novel that I couldn't recommend enough. Now, I don't have them anymore, but if you rewind all the way back to, I think, 1994, we have the Kevin J. Anderson Jedi Academy trilogy. I lent these to my friend back in high school, and he never gave them back. Thank you very much, William. It's okay. I hope you're enjoying them, William. In all honesty, they're fun books. Those followed the Thrawn novels. They were a cool little trilogy of books about Luke Skywalker starting a Jedi Academy, and that was the reason I bought them, because that was what I wanted to see, and it was okay. I remember a lot of the plot. Again, more of the plot than I remember of Darth Bane. And then even though I still have them, I just couldn't find them, I also had these. The trilogy of special edition novels that came out in around 1997. I loved these. These are just the original 3 movie novelizations with nice fancy schmancy special edition covers, and I loved them to pieces. I hope I find them again because I want to read them. These were great. And that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, is all of the Legends fiction that I own. But there's way, way more in my collection that I'm going to show you as we continue with the summer of Legends here on the Rebel Scum Podcast Network. Until the next episode, scumbags, may the force of others be with you.
Hey scumbags, thanks for watching. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up on our video. As always, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Rebel Scum Podcast, for all the latest videos.